Welcome to the Open Forum in the Villages, Florida podcast. In this show, we talk to leaders in the community, leaders of clubs and interesting folks who live here in the villages to get perspectives of what is happening here in the villages, Florida. We are a listener-supported podcast. There will be shout-outs for supporters in episodes. In Season 6, we will continue making substantial improvements to the podcast.
This is Mike Roth, and listeners, I'm thrilled to share with you this podcast, which is my passion project for you. This podcast brings me joy, brings you knowledge, inspiration, and a lot of things that people need to know about the villages, and the people that are living here, and what's actually going on. Creating this podcast is a labor of love, even though it demands more time than I can easily spare. Now, here's where you come in. You can help us keep the podcast alive and thriving. How? By becoming a supporter. First, there's a small monthly donation. Visit our podcast website, openforuminthevillagesflorida.com, and click on the black supporter box. Even a small $3 to $10 a month donation makes a difference. And guess what? You can cancel anytime, no strings attached. Thank you. And your support means the world to us. Stay curious, stay inspired, and keep those headphones on.
Hope you enjoy today's show.
This is Mike Roth on Open Forum in the Villages, Florida. I'm here today with Larry Martin.
Thank you.
Larry has an interesting past. He's a retired pulmonary medicine physician. He and his wife moved to the villages from Cleveland, Ohio, 2015. Larry soon became active in the local writing community. In 2017, he started as the president of the Writers League of the Villages. He also created the club's monthly newsletter and served as the editor of the newsletter for 8 years. In addition, Larry has won several Florida Writers Association awards for short stories and full-length fiction. This year, he published his 27th book. That really is amazing, Larry. I had in the back of my mind one book that I might want to write. I'm hoping it's published after I'm gone. His 27th book is a novel about college students caught up in campus antisemitism and terrorism. Wow, you're writing topical stuff. You look like you haven't been in college in just a few years. So, Larry, why don't you tell our listeners in your own words a little bit about your career?
Thank you for having me. I was a pulmonary medicine physician, and I really began writing while I was in practice in Cleveland, medical books. I wrote several medical textbooks. I also wrote books for lay people about lung diseases. I've been a writer for many years. When I moved here in 2015, I became interested in writing fiction. I started writing novels. I've written several novels since then. And of course, I do a lot of other writing. I write a lot of information on the internet about a variety of subjects. So I just really enjoy writing and teaching. I've been able to take a lot of the information I've learned and use it to give presentations here in the villages on a variety of topics, from Frank Lloyd Wright to Irving Berlin and many others.
You play the piano too, to go with the Irving?
I started playing the piano after retirement, and my advice is don't do that. If you want to learn to play the piano, start when you're 7 or 8 or 9. So I'm not a very good piano player. I understand the music theory from playing the piano, but not proficient at all. Neither was Berlin, by the way. He was not a very good piano player.
Really? He had other people play the piano for the music he wrote?
He learned only one key, F sharp major, which was the black keys. He would always write his music with a trained musician sitting next to him. He would pound out some melody, and the musician would actually write down the notes.
Yeah, there are a number of musicians like that. Wayne Richards here in the villages is a great keyboard guy and a songwriter, and he's written a couple of Broadway shows. He's working on one now. We have him as our accompanist in the improv shows. I wanted Wayne to really get into this improv thing, so I gave him a book on how to do music in improv by Laura Hall, the person on whose line it is anyway. And I'm over at Wayne's house giving him the book, and he says, Mike, this won't be any good for me if there's written music in it, because I don't read music. I do everything by ear. And he's amazing. There was only one page of music in the book. That's where we are. How come you went into these other areas of writing if you didn't study writing when you were in college?
I always enjoyed writing. I did write some in college, but nothing for publication. When I got into practice in Cleveland, we used to give talks to various people about subjects. Back then, we had the old Kodachrome slides. I would give these talks. I say, it's a lot of information that I've learned in giving these talks. Why don't I just write about it? And I did. My first published book was called Breathe Easy, about lung diseases for the general public. And that was published by Prentice Hall. And that led to other writing. And as I said, medical textbooks as well. So it was just something I enjoyed doing.
When we're recording this before the election that has the marijuana initiative on it, as a guy who's got a lot of years of experience in pulmonary medicine, does smoking marijuana hurt your lungs?
I think inhaling anything with smoke can hurt your lungs. It's a matter of degree and how much you do, but whenever you inhale any kind of smoke, it has the potential to hurt your lungs.
How did you become interested in Irving Berlin?
During COVID, I signed on to a Zoom lecture by James Kaplan, who wrote a biography of Irving Berlin. I knew he wrote White Christmas and God Bless America, but not much else. This Zoom lecture was fascinating because I learned that Irving Berlin had no musical training, no education beyond the 7th or 8th grade. He dropped out of school, left home, and became a genius, a musical genius. It struck me as fascinating because I was struggling to learn music. So I then read 5 other biographies of Irving Berlin, and I began putting together a webpage about Irving Berlin, began creating a PowerPoint lecture. So it's one of those subjects, and there are others that just caught my interest. I became obsessed with it.
I see you write PowerPoint presentations, which is a little bit unusual for most of us here in the villages.
Yes, I do give PowerPoint presentations. There are a lot of discussion clubs in the villages, like over a dozen discussion clubs, and I've given talks at a lot of them, on one of them being on Irving Berlin. I've been able to embed his music within the PowerPoint. So when I show the PowerPoint, I click on the music, like Kate Smith singing God Bless America, and people love it. When I embed it into the PowerPoint, it really draws a lot of interest.
You may know I'm teaching an AI course for the Enrichment Academy, and first one we did last month sold out in 24 hours. I added 10 more seats, and those seats went in the next 24 hours. So we'll be teaching it again in the spring-summer semester. I put in for 2 more sessions. One of the guys actually creates the PowerPoint deck for you with a script, music if you want, and just a set of words that you want to describe it, and then you can edit it. When I was teaching the class, I put together the first draft of the course, PowerPoint, by AI. In the end, I used about 40% of it because it creates nice slides. You wrote a book about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Why did you do that?
I've given lectures on hyperbaric oxygen because there's a big hyperbaric oxygen facility here in the villages you may have heard of.
Oh, yeah. Dr. Amir has been on one of my podcasts.
I visited it when it first opened up during the COVID years, and I realized that there's something I was very interested in because I was a pulmonary medicine physician. So I put together a PowerPoint presentation, and I've given that to the science club here in the villages, and I have a website about it, but I haven't written a full book on it.
Does hyperbaric oxygen help regenerate brain cells to stop Alzheimer's disease?
The data shows that it certainly helps people with cognitive impairment while they're under treatment or right after treatment. There are not yet any data about the long-term effects if it's sustained over years.
And there is a hyperbaric oxygen wound care center in the villages as well. Then I see you have a high interest in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yes.
How did you develop that?
We had not traveled to Israel for many years until 2017. We did our first trip to Israel with Rhodes Scholar, and I realized how much I did not know about the conflict. And when traveling around the country, I learned quite a bit, and I came home wanting to learn more, so I did a lot of reading. Then we went back again 2 more times, the last time in over these years in 3 trips to Israel and reading many books, I got to be fairly aware of the total history of the conflict, which, as most people know, goes back well over 100 years. It didn't start just after they declared independence in 1948. It really started
when the British had control.
Even before that, it started in the 19th century, in the 1880s, when Theodor Herzl was publishing, and many Jewish people from Europe were migrating to Israel. And then there was Arab-Jewish wars, the conflicts and battles back starting in the early 20th century. I learned a lot about it. And like every other subject, I decided I'm going to put together a PowerPoint and present information and teach about it. So I also created websites. So that's the pattern. I get interested in the subject. I write about it. I create websites. I give a PowerPoint. I did not write a nonfiction book about it. But then a year ago, before October 7th, 2023, I thought, I have enough information. I'm going to write a novel about the conflict and put it on a fictional college campus. And I did, and that's the book that you referred to.
Ah, okay. Now, we're going to take a short break here and listen to a Alzheimer's tip from Dr. Craig Curtis. So, Dr. Curtis, what do you think the future looks like, Alzheimer's treatment here in America?
I think the future looks very good. I think that these blood tests are going to make a significant difference in our ability to detect someone who's developing Alzheimer's disease before symptoms. A person who develops memory loss due to Alzheimer's disease, we know that disease actually started approximately 2 decades or 20 years prior. We know that amyloid starts building up for approximately 20 years, 15 to 20 years, which then initiates other brain cells or to die off, essentially, which leads to Alzheimer's disease. So we're trying to remove that amyloid prior to that so we can prevent Alzheimer's disease. And we're also attempting to, once somebody already has the cognitive changes or memory symptoms, we're trying to figure out if reducing that amyloid really slows the disease. We now have, of course, the world's first medicine on the market that is slowing Alzheimer's disease by removing amyloid from the brain. And we're looking at newer, more advanced forms of those medications that remove the amyloid much more quickly in a matter of months. So that's very exciting.
With over 20 years of experience studying brain health, Dr. Curtis's goal is to educate the Villages community on how to live a longer, healthier life. To learn more, visit his website, craigcurtismd.com, or call 352-500-5252 to attend a free seminar.
Thank you, Dr. Curtis. Larry, let's do a change of pace and talk a little bit about self-publishing by authors, especially here in the Villages. Is that a good idea?
Great question. There are several hundred active writers in the Villages, and well over 95% are self-published, which means they are arranging to publish the book on Amazon themselves, or they may hire a company to do it for them at some considerable expense. That's still self-publishing if you're paying the company to do your book, because a traditional publisher doesn't charge the author, they pay the author.
Right.
I've put together a PowerPoint on this subject called "The Good News, It's Easy to Self-Publish. The Bad News is It's Easy to Self-Publish." So the exact same statement for good news and bad news.
That's a little surprising. I know that most self-publishers don't make any big money out of publishing their book. It's more like vanity.
Vanity is a bad word. It used to be a vanity press, and it's now been replaced by Amazon, where you can do it yourself and not pay much money. Self-publishing is a way to get out your book with very little expense if you want. You can advertise it, give it to friends, give it to family, whatever you want to do with it. The good news is it's really easy to self-publish today. The bad news is because everyone's doing it. There's 2 million self-published books a year. So you put your book out on Amazon and you think this is the greatest book ever written, but who's even going to know about it? Or you've got to advertise it, publicize it, market it. And most self-publishers, myself included, are not very good at marketing and advertising our product. We let it sit there. And that's a problem with self-publishers. We love to write, we want it out there, but then we don't do the work needed to get it before the public ahead of all those other 2 million books.
2 million is a lot of books a year, and that's a sales job, plus all the multiple millions of books that have been published since Gutenberg invented the printing press. And only a few, relatively speaking, become successful.
The good news in the Villages is that when I first started working with Writers League of the Villages, we could not get our books in Barnes & Noble. And now they've had a new management take over the last couple of years, and now they are putting our books in Barnes & Noble. My new book, the novel I mentioned, For the River to the Sea, is in Barnes & Noble, as well as another book I wrote about the Villages called What Just Landed in the Villages. It's a fictional story. If you go to the Barnes & Noble in Lake Sumter and go to the local authors section, you'll see a lot of books by Villages there. And WLOV also has a shelf called WLOV Books. This is new and this is good, but it still requires advertising, telling people about it. Barnes & Noble does not themselves advertise.
No, I've never seen Barnes &
they don't
Noble.
advertise. It's up to the authors. Put it on Facebook, tell your friends. The author is responsible for doing that.
How many books have you sold?
Not a lot. You hope to sell maybe 1 or 2 a week. Barnes & Noble is a great store. It's huge. I'm talking about one shelf and one tiny section. It's near the cafe, by the way. But
That's an advantage.
the more you advertise, the more you put on Facebook, the more you tell people, the more you sell. It's gotten good reviews on Amazon, but still, it's a matter of getting it known.
So how many of the authors in the Writers League of the Villages have been successful at making some substantial amount of money from writing their books?
I can think maybe less than 5
Less than 5.
that I know of personally.
We had one lady who's an author, who's very successful in writing here in the Villages, and she writes romance novels under at least 2 different pseudonyms. She made me promise not to use her real name in the show, but her latest book is called Rockstar, because she was the wife of the road agent for the Rolling Stones. She wrote the book Rockstar about some of the experiences that she had. It's an interesting business. I spent a lot of years out in L.A., authors trying to sell their scripts to Hollywood, dishonest Hollywood agents.
There's one other aspect about self-publishing I should mention. People who are retired would have a very hard time getting an agent. They usually want younger people who have more years to write more books. You get an agent if you're in your 60s or 70s. It could take years to get your book out there. A lot of people don't want to wait. They want their book out sooner. And that's another reason to self-publish.
Yeah, self-publishing gets them out faster, but it's also got to be self-promoting. And my daughter wrote a book a couple of years ago. It's a nice book on fixing your psychology, molded by your parents and by the last 75 years in your family, the way your parents were molded, and fixing it. She's been very successful in selling the book. She's number 1 in her category on Amazon. What she does is she gives away the Kindle copies, say 1 day a week, and then she uses the book to get her name in front of corporate America, where she's hired as a consultant or to come in and give a speech to their people. And that's worked very well. She has very few private patients anymore. And then she just finished turning the book into an Audible book. She insisted on reading it herself.
I did one of my books with Audible, which is an Amazon company, and there are options. It's pricey. You have to pay money, obviously, to do it, but you can share the profits with the person who's reading your book, or you can pay the full fee up front. So either way, it's unusual, in my experience, for people to make money on an Audible book. It costs a lot of money to do an Audible book.
I would bet it should cost between $5,000 and $20,000. These people who read the book for $500, you're not getting a good reading. I could put one of my AI voices on a book for $400, but it doesn't make any sense.
It sounds like AI.
The newest ones don't really sound like AI. They are, and there's a cost for the AIs, but there is a difference between using a really good actor. I know Mark Newhouse used a great actor for his book about the Holocaust, and that made it a very difficult book to read, easy to listen to. And I think he made a very good decision about turning his book into an Audible book. How'd you get the idea for this new book of yours, River to the Sea? That's the novel about love and conflict on an elite college campus.
So I gave a lecture on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in early spring of 2023. A discussion group afterwards, and a lot of the discussions was blowback from what I was trying to explain. I was rather surprised by some of the opinions that were offered. I remember thinking, how these people get this idea that Israel's completely at fault for the conflict. This is now before the October 7th, 2023 massacre. This is the spring of 2023. I realized that colleges were not teaching students the history, that they simply were not learning what had actually taken place in the last 100 years. And I wasn't going to write a nonfiction book. There's a lot of dozens of nonfiction books, and I'm not really an expert. But I said, I can write a novel about this. So I created this fictional campus outside of Chicago. I put students in it. I had the novel revolve around the anti-Semitism that was flowering in the college. Well, this started in May of 2023, and I finished in September of 2023. When I finished the book, I had it placed in the mid-2020s. And then October 7th happened. I said, my goodness, this book is out of date. It's ridiculous to talk about what could happen when it's happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back and edited the book to make the whole thing take place before October 7th, 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And the very last paragraph, the female protagonist is in Sderot, which is a town near the Gaza Strip, looking out over the border fence and saying to herself, gosh, they could come right over this fence and attack us. But what are we going to do about that? And that ends the book.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we were in Israel, the concern then was only about missiles, and they had bomb shelters everywhere. So I made a prelude to October 7th, 2023, but it's a novel. It's got some sex in it, not graphic, and it's got a lot of history. The history is all nonfiction. It's presented in a series of discussions and lectures, and the characters are fictional. And it's a love story. There's a young girl, a young boy, they're in the college. He wants her to get in bed with him. She says no, and then something happens, and it's that type of novel. So it's written to be interesting and informative. And again, it's in Barnes & Noble.
Okay. You've written these 27 books. You probably have a few more kicking around in your head. If you could go back and give the younger Larry Martin in his 20s some advice from the older Larry Martin, what advice would that be?
I think I started writing fiction without knowing what I was doing in terms of the rules of fiction. I wrote a Civil War novel in 2014, 2015, which I thought was a pretty good novel. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, so it's about General Sherman coming to Savannah. I created a mystery for him. It's called Sherman's Mistress in Savannah. And then I joined a writing club. I read parts of the novel in the writing club. These are critique clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And I read one of the chapters, and some person in the writing club said, Larry, you changed the point of view in this chapter. I did not know what he was talking about. I wrote the novel without knowing anything about the rules of fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Not that the rules can't be broken, but I didn't know them. I would say an early Larry Martin should have studied a little bit about writing and learned some of the rules about the fiction, point of view, and things like that. I just wrote it from the seat of my pants. So I've learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would have done differently.
Mm-hmm. What is the next book you're thinking of pen to paper on?
And it's because I'm writing a book now. Mark and I are writing a book together about Irving Berlin for children, a kid's picture book.
Mm-hmm.
We're still working on that. I'm collaborating with another person in the Villages to write a book about the Great American Songbook, which is a collection of songs
That's fantastic.
from the 1950, and how they relate to movies that show these songs.
Yeah, the first book, I'll give you a little bit of a challenge, Larry. Take your idea, feed it into one of the AIs, and get an output. Tell the AI what your perspective is, what you hope to do with it, and how low you want it to be. Then feed the same input to 3 other AIs. Take all 3 AI outputs and collate them and see what is different.
Do you have a favorite AI that you use?
In the world of AI, the changes are daily. This is a little bit difficult. My favorite yesterday was Microsoft Copilot. I like that one because Microsoft threw a lot of money in to create OpenAI. They use their most current model as well as past models to answer questions and provide advice. The other one that I like is Gemini from Google because that's got a very wide knowledge base. They call them large language learning models. And the bigger your model, the better it is. On the other side of the coin, a company called, I think it's Anthros, which is an AI that you pay for. They have been scraping the web for years. Okay, taking copies of the material in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Just this week, they were sued by those publications saying it was copyright infringement. In my opinion, all of the AIs are capable of hallucinating.
I've had that experience.
First time I asked AI to do the transcript of the show, which is what I do, the very first ones, there was a lot of stuff in the transcript that neither I or the guest said.
When I'm doing research on my Civil War novels, I've written 3 Civil War novels. I use what's called primary sources, that is, sources written during the Civil War. And then I asked AI, and I became very knowledgeable about Sherman's famous telegram to President Lincoln giving him the gift of Savannah as a Christmas present. So I asked AI about it. AI was quoting completely wrong information. They quoted junk from the internet and did not quote any of the primary sources that I knew about. So I became disenchanted the way they just misinformed information.
That means the model they were using didn't scrape back far enough to get Sherman's original telegram.
Right. The stuff is there. The information's on the internet, but AI did not have it.
The problem with AIs is when I started to prepare for the course, there were 168 AIs available in the marketplace. Now it's over 250. It keeps growing every day by 4 or 5. Some of these things do fantastic stuff like screen capture, training videos, and animation. I created a whole video to sell the improv show by putting 3 sentences together, feeding it into an AI video creator. It created the script, the B-roll, the stock footage, the voiceover announcer. After it was finished, it gave me the option to edit. That sold out the show in about 3 days after I put it out there with Constant Contact. If I had attempted to do the same video myself the old way, I was looking at 40 hours of work. It would not have come out as good. I'm a believer in AI now. 3 years ago, I would have poo-pooed AI.
And it changes all the time.
Apple's just putting their big toe in the water with their newest phones. I'm not sure if they have AI chips in the phones, but Samsung in their S25, which should be out early next year, has an actual AI chip, which is better for privacy and security, and probably it'll do things faster, although using the AIs on the web, I haven't run into one today that is slow. They're all reasonably fast to make them extremely usable. So, Larry, if someone wants to read some of your books, how do they do that? Let's go to Barnes & Noble.
They're on Amazon. Not all 27 are still published, but you can go to Lawrence Martin, MD, and you should see all the books pop up. You can email me at drlarry437@gmail.com, and I can give you links to whatever books that you might be interested in, or give you more information about what I've written.
And if someone is interested in having you speak at one of their clubs?
I've been speaking a lot, so I'm pretty well known in the villages for speaking in various different clubs. I just gave a talk to the Freethinkers Club. I've given a talk to the Humanist Club, Philosophy Club, Science Club, other clubs, Civil Discourse. If you're in the villages, just drlarry437@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to give a talk on any subject I'm knowledgeable about.
Great. Thanks a lot for being on the show with us today.
Thank you.
Remember, our next episode will be released next Friday at 9 a.m. Should you want to become a major supporter of the show or have questions, please contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. This is a shout-out for supporters: Tweet Coleman, Ed Williams, Duane Romick, Paul Sorgen, Kathy Loving, and Dr. Craig Curtis at K2 in the Villages. We will be hearing more from Dr. Curtis with short Alzheimer's tips each week. If you know someone who should be on the show, contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. We thank everyone for listening to the show. The content of the show is copyrighted by Roth Voice 2024. All rights reserved.